Today's episode is going to be difficult to offer a concise introduction because I am excited about my guest and the city she is representing, Lagos, Nigeria. Lagos is not the capital, that's Abuja, but it is the largest city in Nigeria and the largest city on the African continent. It is easily a megacity with 13 million within its geographic boundaries, and its larger metropolitan population is 20 million and growing every single day. Our guest from Lagos is Solape Hammond. She has had such an inspiring career already, accomplished from a young age. She earned her bachelor's in Nigeria, then was whisked away to work for Accenture in Europe, earned her MBA, and returned to her beloved Nigeria. Fast forwarding a little bit, she is now the special advisor to the governor on SDGs and investments. I'm going to start with the most straightforward question that we have today. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals are an initiative of the United Nations, which is comprised of national governments. Why should cities care about the SDGs?
Cities should care about the SDGs because I think we have all been looking for a unifying framework that people could relate to. One of the reasons why I like the SDGs a little bit more than the MDGs is just a lot of balance and a lot of fairness. It's a massive framework. It's extremely daunting. I remember when it first came out, I thought these people must be crazy. But the more you work with it, the more you understand it, it kind of makes sense, and there are linkages throughout. So I think it's a great framework, and you can pick what works for you and what you need to focus on, but it gives that unification. And I think fairness definitely across the world. I think the MDGs were too focused on key symptoms of the issues that the developing countries are struggling with, but then also, again, not looking enough at the causes, which may have been coming very well from other countries around the world. So this feels like a much more balanced framework. The other thing I love about it is the fact that there's something for everyone to do. So there's certainly a role for countries, there's a role for states, there's a role for cities, but there's a role for individuals as well. So something as simple, and I'm personally still struggling with single-use plastic. Everyone has a role they can play, children have a role they can play, and you can make it very personal to you. And for me, that's part of why it's very exciting for me as a framework.
That's great. Thanks for taking it all the way from national governments to individual action, so the people who live in cities as well. And the Lagos municipal government has an office of SDGs and investments. That's amazing. When did it launch? What's the story behind it? And why did you choose to pair the word investment with the SDGs?
So, okay, let me just try to be a little less effusive. I think the governor is just absolutely wonderful, and I would have loved to take credit for this idea, but I really can't. It was all him, and it just as soon as he said it fit, and I'll tell you why, starting with our history. So when we started on his journey of running to become governor and then winning and the transition, one of the things he kept saying was, and we all kept saying was, we wanted real outcomes. We didn't really care to be there to do things. We wanted to be there to have impact and be able to really track that impact with our people in particular. And so even when we went through the transition process and took all that the government at the time was working on and layered on it the things that we wanted to see done in these next 4 years, we kept thinking, what are the developmental outcomes that will come from this? So yes, we want, for example, looking at our themes framework, which is what we started off with, transport and traffic management, healthcare and environment, education and technology, making Lagos a 21st century economy, entertainment and tourism, and security and governance. We said, okay, under transport and traffic management, some of the things we wanted to see, for example, was not just that we fixed the roads or we built new bridges, but we wanted to see how we connected communities. We wanted to see how people's journey times reduced. We wanted to see economic prosperity come into communities because we've connected them. We wanted to really see tangible outcomes. And so we developed this framework of KPIs. And I think Mr. Governor looked at it and thought, there's another global framework that looks quite similar to this. We had 124 indicators, it was all very, very similar. And so he then thought, in our drive for investments, and the Office of SDGs and investments used to be called Lagos Global. It was the investment promotion agency for the state. But what we then thought was, if we say what we want to do is focus on developmental outcomes, then our quest for investments and like-minded investors should reflect that. And so this should be the office that drives that developmental agenda. And so he renamed the office of the SDGs and investments. And the interesting thing is, in the past year or two, if you look at the World Association of IPAs, more and more investment promotion agencies are also aligning with the SDGs. So he was just far ahead of the curve, but right on track as usual.
That's great that it's not just an office about investments. Those investments are aligning with a broader framework and strategy, as you mentioned. So I hope that other cities are paying attention and maybe follow suit. And you're the head of this office. Your job title is Special Advisor on the SDGs and investment. What does that job entail?
I think that is really a catch-all for anything and everything. It's typically that. Everyone basically throws everything at me. And nowadays, everyone sort of learned what my buzz, the things that get me going. So they want me to do something. They tell me, hey, but it's going towards SDG this and this. And I'm like, okay, everyone's figured out the hack now. Essentially, our main roles are investment promotion. So that's making the state attractive to everyone to bring in investments and supporting them in that process. Investor relations, because it's not just about investments in the state and what we want to do, but it's also supporting all those who are creating businesses and therefore jobs and bringing development to the state need to be supported as well. So it's investor relations and aftercare. And then we do policy advocacy as well, because sometimes people don't understand our policies and it's important that we make sure that they do. Other times it's important that we also intervene and hear from, the public and our investors to say, hey, you think this works, but it doesn't. And, we take a hard look at it ourselves and make sure that we're intervening. So we're kind of a business ombudsman as well. And then we're responsible, of course, for brand promotion and ease of doing business, which this particular government is extremely keen on. Lagos has been a destination of choice for investment, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa. And we want it to remain so, to become even the world's leading investment destination. And so it's something we're actively working towards. Then, of course, our role is to drive the SDG agenda. So measuring and monitoring developmental outcomes, as well as creating awareness for what the SDGs are, because it's still, to some extent, a bit of a buzzword in these parts. People kind of relate to it a bit, particularly on the goal level, but we haven't dug deep enough to the point of developing targets and measuring actively what it is that we're doing. So we're still in the process of driving that whole framework through.
So basically you do everything, which is great to hear. And I love when you were talking about ease of doing business, because I know a lot of us are familiar with, again, the national ranking of countries of ease of doing business, and that's really important for international investors when they're first doing research. Okay, maybe I want to come to the continent, so which country will be easiest for me? But it's great to look at cities, because cities are actually where business is done. And you kind of alluded to this next question. You started this position 1 year ago, and I'm curious, over that time, how have you seen perception of the SDGs change across the different silos within the government, the local government, as well as public awareness of the SDGs?
So I actually came into office on the 20th of August. So I will be 1 year next week. Yay! And it's been a very, very interesting year. Public perception, I think we came in, and again, I wouldn't like to take all the credit for it. I think the SDGs had sort of been trending a little bit just around the time that we came in. It's become extremely interesting, and a lot of people have suddenly become SDG consultants, and it's great because we need every single person. But as I mentioned, there's still a lot. So where, if you look at that 5-stage journey, particularly along communication, we're mostly all in the first/second sort of bucket. So everyone's becoming aware, but they haven't really translated that into a so what for themselves. So they see this is a good thing and I want to jump on it. But for example, it's not mainstreamed in their activities. So they think it's a good thing, but they still think it's something that should be funded by the CSR budget, for example. This is not, the SDGs are not going to be achieved by a 1 to 3% dedication of budget. The SDGs are going to be achieved when it is mainstreamed, when it becomes the business of businesses to make those changes, to go green, to implement things that are driving sustainability. So it's continuing to improve on that conversation and helping them become aware of how to do that. And the first organization that needs to do that is us ourselves. So as I said, people kind of looked at us. It was interesting. They were trying to figure out what it is that we're doing. Now we've built a network of champions within the different ministries and agencies. We're working with them and orienting them. And a lot of them are actually people who are very keen on this anyway. But then driving that into the actual business of what they do, that this can't be something you look at and say, well, we kind of contribute to 17 or we kind of contribute to 2. No, you have to define how you're going to achieve 2. You're going to define how your programs, achieve that. And it's particularly important that we have a framework for mainstreaming that. So that for us is what we want to do over the next half of this year. Now that we've worked a bit on the awareness piece and bringing the partners together piece, so mainstreaming that, I think, is the next challenge for us in the coming half year.
That's great. And I know you will do it. I want to move to something that's exciting, innovation, and I want to give a little bit of context to this next question. I want to shout out to Impact Hub. For those who don't know, Impact Hub is the world's largest network that fosters entrepreneurship. They have more than 100 locations spanning 5 continents and 50 countries. And a quick comment about entrepreneurship itself. In my opinion, it's not only for people who want to start their own company or invent an app or product. I thoroughly believe every young person in the world should learn entrepreneurial skills because it's a mindset. And the complex challenges the world faces today require innovative solutions. If you think about it, if someone already came up with the solutions, we wouldn't have the problems. And back to Impact Hub, you are one of the co-founders of the Lagos Hub. Why are you drawn to entrepreneurship and how does that connect to achieving the SDGs?
So you've opened a can of worms here because this is something else I can talk about ad infinitum. So the irony of my journey in entrepreneurship, and you're exactly right. They say entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs, but basically we need that entrepreneurial thinking. That innovative thinking is what is going to transform our challenges into opportunities and then solutions. And for me, this caught on very early on. I started my career in banking, risk management, and then I went on to work for a consulting firm, the world's biggest at the time, and I think most amazing consulting firm, Accenture. And, I got to do a lot of things. I worked in risk management, performance management, organization strategy, mergers and acquisition, post-merger integration, a lot of other things. And for me, I could see that corporates were amazing and they were big and they could do things, but I was just drawn to the zeal and the energy and the magic that comes with entrepreneurship. So someone comes in, they look really scrappy, they say they want to start this and it sounds ridiculous, and 3 years later they're doing that and way more. But entrepreneurs in this part of the world were particularly challenged with infrastructure and credit and constraints around talent and just no support. And so for me, that was the quest that needed to be addressed. I saw what was being achieved by entrepreneurial zeal. Everyone says that about Lagos. Everyone who works in Lagos has a job and 2 side hustles. Everyone is so active, so much zeal, so much energy. But I believe that there's a lot more potential that's not quite realized, even though the entrepreneurs in Lagos have been successful, but most of them do not scale. Most of them don't have more than, one store or one hotel or one business. But, counterparts come from around the world, and because they have a lot of business support, then I coach international business competitions and I started 2 years ago and I'm in 10 cities or I'm in 13 cities. And it's hard to even find the credit to scale and the talent support and resources basically to scale beyond one location in this one city. And for me, it was just important to solve that, because once we did, then the ingenuity and the innovation, once they found the solution, could scale rapidly. And I think that's how we're going to solve our problems. So that was what drew me to Impact Hub, because that provided a lot of the foundational challenges, the solutions to the foundational challenges entrepreneurs face. So you didn't have to look for a massive amount of money to rent a space and pay for power and internet and start a business. You could start with just a minimal payment, even a daily payment if that was what you could pay for. It was also a pool of talent and potential partners And, when we opened our doors, we weren't expecting it, but also even supporters and champions from the corporate world and the finance world who were drawn to this mecca of entrepreneurs to support that growth that we were seeing. And so that's sort of how Impact Hub has, and similar hubs. I mean, I love all hubs. I think there's a lot of room for collaboration. There's a lot of work for all of us to do. And I think we need to join hands and do it together. But that's the magic that I see that hubs bring. They provide a home for entrepreneurs who are doing the most important job of all, growing our economy, providing jobs, and creating innovative solutions to the challenges that we have today, turning them into opportunity. Only entrepreneurs that look at something like waste and don't see waste, but see recycling it and turning it into energy and making money from plastic bottles. It's only entrepreneurs who start off, things like, oh, there's no healthcare solution for old people, but they say old people want this, and so they go and figure out how to do it. Or they say poor women at the bottom of the pyramid can't pay back loans, and Muhammad Yunus remains one of my favorite people, one of my role models. And so that entrepreneurial zeal is so vital and so critical, and that for me was why Impact Hub.
Thank you. And we've been talking about the SDGs so far, whose formal title is actually the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the African Union has its own agenda called Agenda 2063, which I quote is Africa's blueprint and master plan for transforming Africa into the global powerhouse of the future. It is the continent's strategic framework that aims to deliver on its goal for inclusive and sustainable development, end quote. What are the similarities and synergies between Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063?
So for me, the things I love about it is, and I think the most important one as far as I'm concerned, is an integrated Africa. That for me, I think has been the challenge of Africa. Only just recently, I was looking at one of the countries in Africa issued a travel advisory stating that they would be opening their borders to, I think, 100 and something countries in the world. And I just counted only 17 of those countries. And I'm wondering, considering that Africa has had a relatively good record with regards to COVID, I know not enough testing, we've had challenges around testing, but even looking at the death rates and, you could tell that the impact seems to be relatively milder. So then I'm wondering why not Africa? There's a lot that we need to do in terms of working together to get to where we need to be. As a continent, we have to be honest with ourselves. Africa is not where it should be. We have all the resources, we have all the mineral resources, we have all the physical resources, we have all the mental resources, the people. And so there is no excuse for where we are. But I think the biggest challenge and what needs to be addressed is that integration. And I think that's what is going to bring us inclusive growth. That's what's going to bring us sustainable development. That's really the key with regards to Africa. I mean, we talk about the size of Africa alone with in terms of land mass and the number of people. And then you look at the economic footprint of Africa, it's way too small. But at least as an aggregated market, it begins to make a little bit of sense and has some level of representation, something that can be taken forward on a global scale. And that's sort of what we need. So for me, that's the piece of the 2063 agenda that I would pick. I think that's the thing that would sort of make the SDG framework make sense for Africa as a continent.
That's great. And I'm sure in the coming years, there's a lot of room for seeing the similarities and aligning those two agendas so they can be achieved in tandem. And you mentioned economic footprint. Today, Nigeria has the largest national economy on the African continent and the largest population on the continent. In fact, Nigeria will be the third most populated country in the world by 2050, after only India and China, and will surpass the United States, which is really crazy to think about. And 2050 is only 30 years away, which is actually not that far away. And of course, I must point out that Lagos is the largest city by population in Africa. So what has Lagos's population growth looked like in the past decade? And how can you use the SDGs to prepare the city to have exponentially more residents even in the future?
People say it, and it may sound a little bit trite, but it really isn't. Lagos, the success of Lagos is the success of Africa, and I don't say that lightly. And this is why. So Lagos today is a city that has a 0.4% of the land mass of the entire country, but hosts 12% of the population, right? And the majority of that population is not growing naturally. It's not growing because of the birth rate. It's growing because of the migration rate. An estimated 86 people come into Lagos every hour, not every day, every hour. That's 2,000 people a day. That's almost 800,000 people a year. That's the estimated migration. Again, there's no way to even have real numbers around that because, of course, it's within the country, so it's not controlled. But as things become more and more economically prosperous for Lagos, more and more people come here, especially when things become, unfortunately, less prosperous in other parts that may sometimes be besieged by violence and other challenges. So that's the first thing, more and more people pouring into here. The second thing is Lagos works. And I know that there's still challenges, but every city in the world, every mega city in the world has challenges. But Lagos works economically. Lagos works commercially. Lagos works to some extent for the people. And in fact, studies have shown, a recent household survey was released, and one of the economic advisors to Mr. President was talking about the fact that Lagos has actually succeeded in transiting to an intermediate economy. So Lagos doesn't just only sound like, or just doesn't only think it's different from the rest of the country. We actually are now, officially. The decisions that Lagosians make are different. They invest a lot more in the education of their children because they've seen, they're working for more jobs that require that level of qualification. They spend a lot more around lifestyle and around, the things that enrich life. It's no longer basic survival needs. So Lagos is already transiting. And when you have that combination of the commercial viability of Lagos, the competence and capacity of its increasingly more educated workforce, and, so all of that is coming together to create something that's quite unique across the African continent. It's strange to believe that a city, again, that small, very tiny landmass, has an economy that's bigger than many countries in Africa, even some of the biggest ones, so Rwanda, Kenya, Ghana. Lagos's economy is bigger. So it's extremely critical that Lagos succeeds. And, we know that this is not just about Lagos, but it's about the entire continent.
Yeah, thank you for putting that in perspective. And, there's so many, all of the SDGs are important. One of the specific ones I'd like to talk to you about is SDG number 7, which is clean and affordable energy for all. Energy is everything today. It literally fuels modern life. And SDG 7 does have its own organization based in Austria called Sustainable Energy for All, which works very closely with the UN. And I noticed that a fellow Nigerian is their CEO, Damilola Ogunbiyi. And for you, I have 2 questions about energy. The first is, in Lagos, how are you ensuring that energy remains affordable while at the same time increasing clean energy within your total energy supply? Because I know that right now, clean and renewable energies tend to be higher per unit.
So that's a great question. And yes, we are very proud of Dami. Damilola Ogunbiyi is not only a Nigerian, but she's from Lagos. She used to be in the government of Lagos. So, we're very proud of her. And this is just the, testament. Many people who've worked in government in Lagos have had the chance to really build something and then be able to take that out to the rest of the country or the rest of the continent or even globally, as Damia has done, and be able to amplify that more. And we look forward to seeing more and more of those things happen. So SDG 7, very, very close to our hearts. We're talking about business prosperity. We're talking about individual prosperity. You need power. Without power, you can't do business. You can't create industry. You can't do anything. So it's something that's a critical challenge. Again, so Lagos, there are 8 distribution companies across the country. Lagos has 2 of them. So just to put it in context, the other 35 states plus the Federal Capital Territory are served by the remaining 6 discos. So that's just sort of show you the amount of power that's used and required in Lagos. And these 2 are 2 of the most viable of these distribution companies. There's some benefits that brings, the fact that there's some assured demand and, real demand as opposed to, so demand that's viable demand, people who are ready to pay for the power. There's also density, so it makes it, a little easier to transmit power and to deliver what needs to be delivered. But there's still a lot of challenges in the area of power. Over the years, prior to privatization, because of underinvestment in the energy infrastructure and transmission and distribution networks, there are a lot of people who have tapped in or hacked in and therefore access power without paying for it. So there are a lot of losses from, just the equipment infrastructure not being up to standard, and as well as people tapping in illegally. So a lot has to be done, but people are at the point where, it's chicken and egg. The distribution companies require you to pay more so that they can invest in the infrastructure. The people are tired of paying without getting any power and so don't want to. So there's a bit of an impasse there. So what the government is trying to do is to step into that gap, to say, look, our people need power. And so we're working with the distribution companies. And the way to do it is really to have a meter for every home. Then once you've metered the consumers, they can pay for what they're using, as opposed to something called an estimated bill, which used to be given. And you might get an estimated bill and not have had any power a month. So of course you don't want to pay it. So we've stepped into the gap and we're providing, at the first instance, 20,000 meters to the poorest of the communities so that we can use that as a test run. I think there was talk by Mr. Governor of even standing in the gap for a period of maybe anything from 2 to 4 months to pay the difference between the proposed tariff and the actual tariff, so that people can then test and see, okay, I'm actually getting the power without having to pay that tariff. That way the discos can make the investment we need them to make, and the people will get the power and then would agree to pay the improved tariff. Lagos is also one of the first states and one of the more prolific states where there's something called a willing buyer, willing seller agreement, which then says, okay, the tariffs are regulated, which is a challenge. As we've said, it's not enough for the companies to be able to invest. But with this, people can say, as an estate or a network or a group or a set of companies, we are willing buyers and we're willing to buy at a higher price. And we've seen a lot of those agreements go out in Lagos, and a lot of areas get electrified as a result of that. We recently had I think last weekend actually, a smart meter hackathon to work with Nigerian entrepreneurs, startups, to come up with smarter ways for us to improve on the meters that we're getting, make them cheaper, but also use them to be able to get other things that we need, and so on and so forth. And so that's another investment that we're making. And then in the area of clean energy, we're looking at that across our entire network. So trying to green the energy solutions that the state itself. So Lagos has 8 independent power IPPs that power this, the state and critical infrastructure like hospitals and things like that. So looking to make those greener, so using gas. I think quite a few of them are gas already, but looking to green the ones that aren't. We're also investing and doing the research right now of converting a lot of the diesel and petrol buses and just high capacity transportation network into gas, ahead of then turning them into electric. Not turning them into electric, but bringing in electric buses to take out some of the ones with the dirty energy. So there's a lot of investment and a lot of work being done just in the area of not just providing energy for all, and especially at people at the bottom of the pyramid, because they are the ones who can't afford to buy generators. Those who are wealthy will just power themselves, but the ones who are poor are the ones who can't. And then to green out the transport network and just increase energy efficiency across all our buildings. We're doing a massive program now, looking at the network of street lighting. I never had any idea how much power those things consumed, but we're in the process of working to replace all of that with LED lighting, which is definitely lower efficiency, lower energy consuming. And that's actually not just going to save us energy and make it greener, but also going to save us money. So those are just some of the things that the state is doing with regards to it's great to go green. So just some of the things the state is doing with regards to affordable energy and clean energy.
Well, thank you so much for that overview of energy. And I totally agree. I like to say, you don't know what you don't know, when you were talking about not realizing how much energy the street lights work. And if I may, I just want to hammer home hammer into one part of the question a bit further, which is, we talked about population already. So as population gets bigger, obviously, so does overall demand for energy. So I want to ask specifically, how do you ensure that that increase in demand, right? So that difference, that marginal increase, is being met by clean and renewable sources rather than fossil fuels? So for example, as the demand increases, we've seen some countries, they're just trying to keep up, so they build new coal plants, for example. But how do you make sure that in order to keep up, that demand is being met by clean sources?
So for Nigeria, the irony of it is Nigeria is not an oil and gas country. It's not an oil country, really, crude oil country, as most people think. Nigeria is actually a gas country. That's the irony. But the challenge has been building up that gas infrastructure, maybe providing the right level of demand, given, I don't know if the challenge really is demand or supply. I know at some point, because of the regulated gas prices, then people were not interested in investing. But I think as regulation lifts, as the market has proven, more and more people will invest in gas. I think majority of the power plants that have gone up in the last 8 years have been gas plants. So I think Nigeria is definitely moving in the right direction. And particularly given that the real challenge for us is the transmission and distribution network. So right now, I think nameplate capacity for us is probably in the region of 15 to 20,000 megawatts, but the transmission system can only take about 4 to 5,000. So that the real challenge is more around fixing the transmission and distribution network. Once you can do that and people can actually evacuate the power that they have, then costs can go down and more investment can be made. So what I would surmise to say is that I think the direction is definitely greener energy. We also need to talk about what's going on in the solar energy space. It's been extremely exciting. It's something that even at Impact Hub we were supporting probably about 3 to 5 energy companies all working on green energy, including one that's actually creating a very interesting solution that's not even solar, but I won't be able to talk about that for a while. Yes, very interesting. But anyway, there's been an increased proliferation of solar-powered companies. I think there are now 2 companies in the country trying to make the panels here, which for me is critical because you don't always want to be at the downstream end of the value chain. We also want to, gain some of the knowledge and some of the benefits of being at the upstream end of it. So that's something else that's also looking to grow. Of course, Lagos remains an extremely viable market, whether you're looking at the micro end of the scale with a little barber who needs just 440 kilowatts for his store, or a big company that just has a rash of solar panels on their roof. Impact Hub Lagos went green 2 months ago. We kitted out, yes, with solar panels. So we're almost, I think we can say we're 70% green now, which for me was, one of the objectives when we started out. So more and more people are looking towards that. I mean, the sun is free. So, as much as is possible, let's use that.
Wow. Well, oh my gosh, so much excitement already in this conversation. I mean, there's so many exciting things going on in Lagos, and I look forward to further conversations beyond this. Maybe we'll have a whole dialogue just about clean energy solutions in Lagos. But for now, zooming back out from Lagos and looking at, as more people flock to cities around the world, we've seen the emergence of megacities, which you mentioned earlier. And this is defined as a city with a population of at least 10 million people. In 2020, the world has 40 megacities. That means 40 cities with a population of more than 10 million people each, and 10 million is larger than the population of 145 countries. That's crazy. Lagos's population, just within city boundaries, if we're getting technical, is 13 million, and the larger metropolitan population is 21 million. I should say estimated, of course, as you mentioned, many people coming on a daily basis. And to put that number in perspective, Lagos by itself has more residents than countries such as Greece, Sweden, the UAE, Austria, Switzerland, and I could keep going all day. Today, Africa arguably has 4 megacities: Lagos, Cairo, Joburg, and arguably, I say because Kinshasa and Brazzaville are often counted as one. Further, according to the World Economic Forum, urban population in Africa will double by the year 2050, which means Africa will add at least 8 more megacities by that time. What do you think are unique challenges to all megacities around the world? And perhaps, is there another set of unique challenges faced by megacities in the global south?
So I would say megacity challenges remain the same. So when we were at UNGA last year, Mr. Governor could not resist making a jibe at every New Yorker saying, your traffic is worse than ours, He was so relieved. We've been getting a lot of knocks on traffic at that time. So he was like, well, I'm in New York, it's even worse. Maybe what it is most cities have evolved organically, and maybe that's the challenge for us going into the future. The fact that we all know what the problems are with the city, and I think we all should be able to plan it better. So sometimes, so I'll tell you some of the challenges of Lagos. The challenges of Lagos, the economic center is, here, and then everyone comes to that economic center because it's sort of evolved naturally. So it's not just they come there for jobs, but they come there because increasingly the services they need are also concentrated there. So you want a good hospital, it's closer to the center. You want a good school, it's kind of closer to the center. The airport is kind of closer to the center. So traffic goes one way in the morning and one way in the evening. And it's just bad spatial planning. But you look at new cities that are being developed, and many of those, you can plan better. So you plan exits a certain way, and you plan, for there to be services for everyone. And part of the challenge is quality service, right? So you don't want, I'm not going to stay in a zone or force my child to go to a school in a zone where it's bad just because I live there. I'm also going to look for the best options for my child, whether it's healthcare or education and so on. So the challenge for us, I think, for the next 40 years is to build better cities that are planned out better, cities that anticipate what the future brings and what people like and need, and make sure that those things are easily available. I think that it's the same way the grid system sort of used to work before. I grew up in a city called Ibadan that was gridded, and traffic was a lot better. And I just couldn't understand Lagos because there were certain areas that were gridded, but then certain other areas you could only get to with one road. So there's invariably traffic on that one road. So I think for me, the Sustainable Cities SDGs, one of the most important of all, and the Innovation, Infrastructure and Industry SDG, because those for me, that's where a better future is going to come from. The thinking, using better materials and all of that. The other challenge that I'm seeing that new cities are falling into is listening to the trope that because a city, land is valuable, so we all have to live in little tin cans like sardines. I think that's something we very rapidly need to reject. Now, Lagos unfortunately doesn't have as much of a choice because it's so small, we can only go up. But new cities need to be more expansive, building the green areas that people need to be able to live and thrive, building, there's certain areas that you go to and there's actually no park. It's just buildings, concrete buildings and roads. Building those things that people need. We all need those things. We have forgotten that we do, but we do. And so for me, those would be the things I would say to a city. And if we build them well, that will help us even address other challenges like security. Because if a neighborhood is built a certain way, then it's not as easy. Being in a city, I think it was one of Malcolm Gladwell's books that talked about how a woman was stabbed in broad daylight in New York and no one paid attention because everyone else thought someone else would do something. When we build our cities in a certain way where everyone becomes anonymous and a number, the feeling that we have as a community goes away. So we have to ensure that in building our future cities, we avoid some of these tropes, we learn from the lessons of the past, and make sure, of course, that the buildings are sustainable. I think those would be the things I would be looking to build in a new city.
Great. So if you're listening out there, we need more and more city planners with innovative visions. And I want to come back to your mention of the 80 or 82 people coming into Lagos every hour, not every day. And because the population is growing so fast, I imagine it must be difficult for construction of new housing to keep up. So this results in massive informal settlements. For example, Makoko is well known around the world. How do you keep up with the new and growing settlements across the city? Do you use any type of innovative data such as Earth observation, like satellite imagery?
Mm-hmm. So that has been a major challenge for us as a state. And as I said, as things become more difficult economically in other climes, and as more people become more successful in Lagos, then more people come. I mean, we've had incidents where there was a truck that had 86 men and 27 motorbikes. Yeah, so all of them were going to come and try and live on those motorbikes to find a better economic future. Those are some of and you can't stop them from coming in. They're other Nigerians, right? So that's been a challenge. So Lagos actively tracks the number of slums. The number of slums went from 65 in 2017 to 665 last year. So this, is a ticking time bomb if it's not well addressed. So it's one of the things that we're actively tracking. There are also a lot of abandoned buildings, many of them owned by other individuals or owned by other governments. And, it's something that we're working on with regards to the laws to enable us to be able to address that challenge. Because what then happens is people come, they need a place to stay, they start using a building, sometimes even the people who are supposed to be managing the building are complicit. So because of that, it's very difficult to keep up because they're not legal tenants. So then how do you track people? So as you mentioned, some of the things that we're doing, Lagos we're basically in the process of creating a smart city. We're rolling out many initiatives, and some of those things that we're doing, of course, is a drone program. So for reconnaissance and so just for city mapping. And so they will fly over the city given intervals and also be able to go out and do, search and rescue and whatever else it is that's, immediate emergency scanning and things like that. So with that, we will be able to track what's going on. So you can see, people move in, maybe they make a tent in the backyard. You can see this building looks different than it did 2 weeks ago when we flew over, and then you can, physical planning can go and investigate, or the health teams can move in. So it's something that we've just, the drones were acquired last year. Some pilots have been trained. They've done a couple of test flights, and I think it's something that they're working to just finalize the technology platform that's all going to sit on, so that they can roll that out. But it's certainly something that we're looking at.
That's great. The more data, the better. And it sounds like the drone program is great because you can get that new data much more quickly. You said maybe every week or every 2 weeks. So that's great. I'm so excited to hear that and look forward to the rollout very soon. I want to talk about water. It seems like there's a water paradox in Lagos. Lagos suffers devastating floods that we all see on the news, but also Lagos citizens suffer from water supply shortages from time to time. Why is that, and how is Lagos working to both build its resilience against flooding while at the same time ensuring adequate access to clean water for its residents?
So yes, it is a water city where people don't have water. It's a challenge not just of Lagos, but a challenge of the underinvestment again in infrastructure that happened, most prevalently during the years where we were under military dictatorship. This is 20 years later, but it's still work in progress for us on many, many fronts. So Lagos, the statistics, probably look a little poorer than they really are. So yes, in terms of water access, reticulated water access, the numbers are low. But in terms of clean water provision, the numbers are a lot higher than you would see reported. Because what happens is people get water delivered to them. So we have blighted communities, of course, like Makoko, which you had mentioned earlier on, that would have much more of a challenge, particularly because that's actually even on the water. And people may not think they can afford to buy cleaner water. But by and large, most people can have water delivered. What Lagos has been doing is investing in developing waterworks to at least make sure that that water is available, whether it comes through the limited reticulation network that we have, or whether it's trucked to you through a water tanker. There's also, so there are, I think, 3 or 4 major waterworks. The main one that we're investing in now is one that's called Adiyan 2, which when it's completed will provide 745 million gallons of water a day. And I think that's enough to meet our water needs for, I think, 50 or 60% of the population. So putting it together with everything that we have, I think we will then be able to meet the needs of everyone. But the resources required just for that are enormous. And then you then have to think about how the investment in reticulating. So we're working with a lot of development partners to address that challenge. But the focus is, first of all, let's just even be able to get clean water, so fixing the upstream part. And as we move further, we'll try and make sure that more and more homes are connected with the reticulation system. But this is a nationwide challenge. So I remember the last time I expected water to come out of my tap from, sourced from the government was probably about 1992. My father was a geologist. Again, I said I didn't grow up in Lagos. He built his house and then he dug a borehole because he had a company that did that. And that was that. And that's how we got water. And I assumed, waterworks, companies were all dead. So I was surprised. It was only 2 years ago when we, again, were talking about this journey and people said something about, I get water. I'm like, what do you mean get water? From the mains? They said, yes. I'm like, really? People still do that? So, it is a national challenge and it's work in progress, but it's something that we aim to have resolved, at least the upstream part, in the next 1 to 2 years. And then as, time goes on, we'll just reticulate to more and more homes.
That's great. And talking about water is a great segue into talking about waste again. I know it was brought up earlier, but I think it's so important to highlight once again, because every city I talk to highlights this as a key challenge, whether it's the global north, global south, doesn't matter what continent. And I think that Lagos is no exception. Again, obviously, as population grows, so does the amount of waste. And waste relates directly to literally every single SDG, and especially is apparent in number 6, which is clean water and sanitation, and number 15, which is life on land. I've read, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because unfortunately I've never been to Lagos myself, but something like 40% of daily waste is reliably collected by the municipal government on a daily basis. So you did say that your city and your office specifically is working on this challenge. Could you talk a bit about what you're working on and any specific examples of projects?
Okay, so just to clarify, our office works with the other ministries and agencies on the issue. So we aren't responsible for driving this. There's a Ministry for the Environment, and there's a Lagos State Waste Management Authority, and they primarily drive this agenda, and they've done an amazing job. So Lagos, the way Lagos has worked, we've broken the city into grids, and essentially have waste management companies that are responsible for picking up the trash for each of those. But the sheer amount of waste is unbelievable. Lagos generates an estimated 11,000 to 13,000 tons of waste every day. And 40% of that is organic waste. And then, the main 60% is plastics, largely plastics, single-use plastics, styrofoam packs, transparent clear plastic bags that people use, not just for shopping, but for water access. So you can imagine how much of that ends up in landfill. In fact, one of my biggest constraints or concerns around surgical masks is, I think if we mainstream that, that's going to become the next new source of waste. So you can imagine what the challenge is. So then this is being attacked by the state on many, many fronts. So the first challenge is waste hasn't traditionally been sorted. So everyone puts everything together. So then it makes it very difficult for anyone to use the waste. So you can't, the cardboard is all covered with food. You can't use the plastic once it's oily and things like that. So getting that whole culture of waste sorting was one of the first things that we did, and we launched a Blue Box initiative around that. Then the second thing is more and more, thankfully, the economic viability of reusing plastics, and to some extent some of the other, so cardboard and things like that, is becoming more and more proven. So there are a lot of people who are doing plastics recycling, using them for filler for mattresses, even exporting some of the waste. So there's a lot of work going on there, but there's a need to look at that sector and sort of help them scale up. I think we also need to find more commercial outlets for the use of the organic waste, because that's 40% of the waste. And then there's also increasingly corporates getting into the process. So we're talking to, I think, 2 companies now that are proposing, or one of them is calling a geocycle process, where they have a really high-end incinerator that basically takes care of some of the other things that are harder to recycle. So things like tires and green colored plastic bottles and some of the other things that are harder to recycle, which can then be burnt up in their process of actually making their product. So it's not just for making waste. So that's a fantastic collaboration. They help us in the process of doing their own work, and they can use some of that to put in the cement that's used for roads. So it sort of works together that way. And then of course we're talking to waste to energy and waste to wealth companies who also want to come in. But, for example, my office has seen about 4 or 5 that are interested, and on a concession basis, which for us is particularly important. But for example, as I said, 11 to 13,000 a day. The largest I've seen wants to do 4,000 a day. So I even need probably 10 or 12 of them just to deal with the waste that already exists, and not just the new waste. But it's all, work in progress, and we all have to work together to sort of find a lasting solution. I loved what you said about, just some of the examples that you've seen where, waste landfill becomes golf courses, and that's sort of what we're working towards, because we're actually running out of space as a state for where to keep waste. Oh, but the other thing I should have said is, I'm not so sure that the 40% would be true. So the capacity for the Waste Management Authority has been boosted significantly in the past year. And so things have gone back to waste being able to be collected. However, sometimes some individuals prefer to patronize the smaller guys who go around with a little wheelbarrow, and then they pick up the waste and they take it down the road and dump it in the drainage. So we're trying to address that without disenfranchising them because they can't afford the infrastructure. But I think waste collection is probably closer to, the high 80s or 90% now.
Great. And you talked about a lot there, like waste to energy and opportunities to create economic opportunities from waste. And I think a lot of times people scrunch their faces when they talk about waste. They're like, ew, that's gross. But personally, it sounds like you're similar to me in that I always see the glass as half full. There's always a positive side to anything. And when it comes to waste, there are a lot of innovations out there making waste a benefit to the community. And if you've not read about it already, both you and everyone listening, I encourage you to Google Amar Baki, and it's Amager, but it's a Danish word. It's in Copenhagen. It's also known as Copenhill, which is the most impressive waste to energy plant that I've ever seen. And it was designed by a Danish architect by the name of Bjarke Ingels. And you mentioned there is a golf course in Chicago, or I should say the suburb of Chicago, that's on top of a former landfill, and it has great views of the city, so it's become somewhat of a tourist attraction. So just to put you on the spot, do you have any grand ideas about how Lagos can turn the waste challenge into opportunities, plural?
So it's very similar. And we've seen, again, I think the pointer always comes from the entrepreneur. So mining waste, for me, the first time I ever heard about it was scavengers mining the waste in Lagos for used batteries and extracting lead and other precious metals. And then I heard about people doing it from a plastics perspective. So one of the things I should mention is that I also sit on the board of the Lagos State Council for Science Research and Innovation, together with the Special Advisor on Innovation and the Commissioner for Science and Technology. And some of the things that we're looking at is how to leverage innovations in waste. We're providing grants to companies that are coming up with amazing ideas. I mentioned before that 40% of the waste is organic. That doesn't just come from households. An incredible amount of waste occurs at the markets. A lot of food waste is lost there. But I was working with this, and I've encouraged him to apply for one of the grants. There's this young man on one of just this innovation groups that we had, who was doing some amazing research into vinegar and just, what happens when you use bananas, what happens when you use oranges, what happens when you use this, okay, this works better with this, what happens in combinations. And we're buying, organic vinegar at a ridiculously high price here because we don't make it. So imagine someone like that plugged into the market, just taking some of that organic waste, about to go bad food, and turning it into vinegar. He's basically turning that into, another product, and a premium product, by the way. So there's so many ways to connect. And for us, it's working not just with the waste management authorities, but leveraging the innovation network that we have to create new businesses that will then grow and turn these into industries. And we've seen this happen. The plastic waste recycling is about to go mainstream. And it's just, the government is there to provide the support. So I'm hoping everyone out there who's listening, please look out for the LASRIC website, get on there, lasric.org.ng, and apply. Lagos is giving out grants to support.
We will link that, definitely. And I said many times, sadly, I've never been to Lagos myself, but hopefully in the near future. I don't want to knock you for this because I know you already brought it up about the traffic, comparing it to New York City during the UN General Assembly. And you did already talk about some of the causes of this traffic. But I'm really interested myself in what is the public transportation system like in Lagos? I heard there might be something new coming.
So, yes. The transport system is one of our joys. Okay, so for me, I'll talk about both the road network and then the opportunities for moving across those networks. So traditionally, I think 85% of the traffic in Lagos moves on roads. So you can imagine these, and we think it's closer to 24, 26 million people. So you can imagine these 26 million people, including the daily visitors, by the way. I don't know if you realize, but a lot of people who come in to transact business in Lagos also come from neighboring states like Ogun and Oyo. So, it's more than just 26 million of us moving on these roads. How much of a road network can this tiny state of, 2,000 odd kilometers of land provide? So it's never going to work. Road was never going to be the answer. So in addition to doing new roads, and we're very excited about some of the new roads we're doing, particularly in our free zone area, where the world's largest oil refinery is going to open in the next 1 to 2 years. So we're building new roads to take some of that demand straight out to the rest of the country, and also opening up that area in sort of like the circular road in London. We're basically making it possible to go around the state in a circle and not just one road in, one road out. But in terms of modes of transport, what we've resolved to create, and we're determined to create, is a multimodal network, an integrated multimodal network. The history of rail in Lagos starts probably in the 60s, kicked off properly in the 80s when one of the very famous former governors, Governor Jakonde, was there, and the federal government was supposed to sign an agreement, and then that didn't happen. And then Lagos had no rail for another 20 years. So when Governor Fashola, who was governor between 2003 and 2011, when he came in, between 2007 and 2015, he was determined to revisit the rail story. But the challenge is no subnational in the world does rail. But after going back and forth, talking to a few partners, you realize, look, if we want this thing to happen, let's just bite the bullet and do it. And he started this investment, and everyone probably thought he was crazy. It's been a massive investment. It's been huge. But he started something called the Blue Line. And now we are poised to finish that in the next year or two and start, trials. So basically have it ready for commercial activity in 2 years, but finish it by the end of next year. All that became possible because he started it. And when the private sector saw that we were determined to finish it, we started the first phase of 14.5 kilometers. It's a 27 kilometer in total, but the first phase, 14.5 kilometers. The private sector has now come in to say they want to take over the entire program. And so we're in the process of closing that transaction. That Blue Line will move from Festac all the way to Marina. Of course, that means absolutely nothing to you until we get you to Lagos, but it's going to carry a massive amount of traffic. This is one of the worst areas for traffic in the entire state. And then when the phase 2 happens, it's going to extend to Badagry, which is kind of on the border between us and Benin. So it's basically opening up Lagos for traffic. Now, there was also another line and there's a total of 7 lines that have been looked at by Lagos. So 6 lines, different colors across different locations. And then the 7th one, that's sort of light rail within the city center. So Lagos, Victoria Island and Ikoyi. The second line, the red line, was supposed to cohabit with the existing federal government line that goes from Lagos to another town called Ibadan. And for years, we just couldn't get an agreement on the alignment. I think there were different opposing camps and political camps, so we couldn't get an agreement. And there was encroachment on the line. But then last year, Mr. Governor started a very interesting conversation and said, hey, instead of trying to create 2 lines, why don't we share a line? You want to do a service that goes every hour from Lagos to Ibadan and stops in 3 stations. We want to create a service that goes every 8 minutes and has 13 stops. Why don't we just cohabit on the same line? And he got them to agree. And that is saving us somewhere in the region of $600 million, because instead of having to build out a new line for $1 billion odd, we're going to spend about $200 million. We are in the process of closing on that transaction as well. We have a fixed fee contract in Naira, sub 10% rate. And those who are Nigerians know what I mean. Probably the cheapest infrastructure project ever financed in this country. We're probably going to close out on that in the next 2 weeks. So in the next 2 years, we will have 2 rail lines that have the capacity to move 700 to 800,000 Lagosians a day. That is super exciting. That is going to change the face of transportation in Lagos. And it's not just rail, it's also water. So we've made massive investments. I think we've bought 14 boats this year to complement what's been going on with the private sector. So there have been a few private operators who've been trying over the years to keep it going, but there have been a lot of challenges, everything from dredging challenges, not enough jetties, not enough money to invest. And then, I mentioned the one-way traffic of Lagos. Well, what happens is when they bring people in the morning, there's no one to take back for the second shift. So then it would cost you, because you have to pay for the return journey, which meant water transportation was not affordable. So people would just prefer to be on the roads. So we've come in, we're trying to improve things in that area. And one of the things we're trying to do is to create a single ticket that you can use on the water, in the buses, and on the rail. And Mr. Governor launched that today, actually. So I'll send you some videos. So he commissioned a bus terminal in a place called Oshodi. and he bought his ticket today, and that's going to be the system that's going to power the entire thing. So that's sort of some of the things we're doing in the transport sector. And I can tell you, our traffic is probably going to be much better than yours in the next 2 years.
Oh, good. And for reference, today is August 11th, in case people are listening to this at a later date. But that's so exciting. It makes me think of my hometown is Chicago, and we also have a card that works for everything. It's called Ventra, and we also have a red line, and it's infamous. So Chicagoans know what I'm talking about, but if not, you can read a lot about the red line. Wow, so many opportunities, and we're down to the last few questions, I promise. Another project that I read about that's been happening and is continuing to happen in Lagos is called Eco Atlantic, which is a public-private partnership. Could you tell us about that?
So Eco Atlantic is super exciting. Eco Atlantic is a brand new city, and the origins are, it's just amazing. That's another example of just innovation. So Eco Atlantic is a project that arose because the very famous Bar Beach, which was our, one of the prime, even I didn't grow up in Lagos, and I came to Bar Beach pretty much twice every year whenever I came to visit, was very well known, and we had buildings, but erosion had eaten away the entire beach, had started to eat away at the road in front of the beach, and it'd be great. I mean, you can look for pictures online, and basically had VI, which is one of the most expensive, it's the most expensive real estate areas in the whole country, was under threat because the water was coming. And so the idea was, let's do some shoreline protection. And, they were putting these concrete blocks. And then someone thought, why don't we fill this out the way, similar to the Dubai Islands? And so they did. And so they created, I can't remember how many hectares it is. I can't remember if it's 10,000 hectares, but they basically created this massive new city just off the coast of Victoria Island. So they put the beach back in, but they put a lot more back in, and it's an unbelievable infrastructure investment. I mean, you go there and you can't but smile. I think if I remember correctly, I think the plan is for 800 high rises. It's basically a city for 250,000 people. Again, as I mentioned, it's your perfect opportunity to put a properly planned city in, and it provides for everything. And essentially, it's essentially Dubai. It's our own Dubai. It's high-rise buildings, it's expensive commercial and real estate and residential real estate. It's high end. It's the city for people who want to come in from offshore and set up companies and not have to bother coming into the rest of Lagos. They've got their own. They have a license to basically have clearing and customs. So it's basically a new city. But Eco Atlantic isn't the only new city that we're building. I'm also extremely excited about the Lekki Free Zone, which is also 12,000 hectares of land. And we have, right now, there are 4 quadrants. So one quadrant is the Dangote refinery, which I had mentioned earlier, which is the world's largest refinery, will be the world's largest refinery. Second quadrant is being done in conjunction with the Chinese company. The third quadrant is being done in conjunction with a company called Rendezvous that's built this in many cities around the world, including in Rwanda, in Kenya, in South Africa. And they started just 14 months ago. I was up there about a month ago, and I was just stunned at the progress and the number of companies that have come in. And then the fourth quadrant is available in case anyone's looking to make long-term investments in real estate. It's also going to have its own airport. It's also home to it's what's going to be the largest the deepest deep sea port in Africa and the largest in the country. We're also developing that. We got a $1 billion investment in that started last year in conjunction with China Harbour and Tolerance, a Singaporean company. And we're looking to finish the first phase by next year, which will allow us to process, I think, 1.2 million tons TEUs a year. But the second phase is then 1.2 or 1.5, so a total of 2.7. The current capacity of the entire country is 1.4. So that area is also going to change the face. That's much more industrial and commercial in nature than the high-end residential and probably white-collar commercial that is Eco Atlantic. And so many new cities starting in Lagos. We're hopefully looking to even do one in the Badagry end. I mentioned the trains. Once we've done that, that's also likely to be a highly industrial hub. So we're talking to people who are interested in setting up an auto park, which is, not just manufacturing these electric buses I talked about, but making some of the components for the auto industry. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in Lagos.
Yes, I'm literally bursting with excitement. I'm so excited, and hopefully this inspires other cities to be this active. And wow, the current status of Lagos is already so vibrant and successful, and there's just more to come. And to round out our conversation, I do want to return back to the main theme here, which is the SDGs and Agenda 2030. I'm sure you would agree, for any project, it's important to measure progress and periodically evaluate how it's going in order to adjust your strategy and work plan. At the national level, countries use something called the Voluntary National Review, aptly named. And I noticed within the mandate of the Lagos Office of SDGs and Investment, it is stated to monitor and measure the outcomes and impacts of all projects relevant to SDGs. So how are you currently doing that?
So what we have kicked off is a sustainability assessment to begin with. One of the challenges I had mentioned was because it's still more of, to many, a descriptive framework. So something that says we align with this, as opposed to a measurement framework. We hadn't really imbibed these targets. We don't have targets and things like that. So we hadn't mainstreamed all of this. So we're starting first with a sustainability assessment for ourselves, and then we would expand that to a sustainability assessment for our partners, and then we will sign up to a voluntary review. So it's something that we're definitely going to do sooner rather than later. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Great. You mentioned the voluntary local review is the counterpart to the voluntary national review, and New York City initiated the VLR several years ago, and they continue to make this push for cities around the world. And I was gonna entice you by saying Accra is so far the first and only city in Africa to have completed one. So I'm sure you're coming next.
Challenge immediately.
Well, thank you so much. That was, no offense to anyone else, my favorite conversation so far about cities and the SDGs, and I'm sure this energy will be reflected by our listeners as well.
Thank you so very much. I've really enjoyed it. The only constraint we need to get you to Lagos. So, as soon as flights start to go around, we shall expect you to come and validate all this with your own eyes. And we'll be very happy.
I'll be there.